Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for choosing this session. My name is Liron Adar. I head up the IR Solution and Client Relations at IDX. Just to give you, just in a nutshell, what is IDX? IDX is a global digital communication company. We help companies to make a better connection with their different stakeholders via corporate and our websites, webcasting, content, and of course our solutions. I will let Simon to introduce himself, and thank you again for choosing this.
Good afternoon, everyone. I seem to have the graveyard shift before coffee, so I'll try not to be too dry as I go through my presentation. The one thing I would ask you, and you don't need to shout out the answers out loud, I will ask you in your head to think about a number of questions I'm going to pose to you as I'm talking. And I think the first one, the most fundamental one, is, are the investment community engaging with your online content, your corporate website or your IR website? Or are they simply just coming to download documents to read offline? Because if they are, you're missing an opportunity. And my mission over the next 40 minutes is to show why and how you can optimize your online communications to drive belief in your investor story. And belief is an important thing, because very few good investors invest in a business purely because it's performed well in the past. They invest in a business because they believe it is undervalued because of its potential performance in the future. So as investor relations professionals, we're in the business of building belief. And building belief is quite a difficult but a very important part of our role. My presentation today is geared around observed behavior of investors as they use online communications. So I like to think that there's a little bit of science in here, not just opinion. And I mentioned this idea of building belief, and belief comes down to storytelling. We all know that from an early age. And there was a large research study of investors in the US as it happens. And it asked them, are you more likely to invest in a business that's got a strong investor story, or are you just going to invest based on the financial fundamentals? Unsurprisingly, 85% said, we're going to invest in the company with a better story. It's that idea of thinking towards the future. And I thought long and hard around how to kind of summarize what makes a good investment story. And there's lots of nonsense you can tell about this, but I actually saw a capital markets report, and a fund manager said, the most important aspect for me is, do they have a credible plan and the capability to deliver it? A credible plan and the capability to deliver it. And if we unpack that slightly, if we think around that kind of belief story and ask ourselves, is it easy to follow my company's story? Probably at the center of that story is some element of sustainable value creation, whether that's EBITDA, whether that's growing customers, whatever that may be. And that's underpinned by those three core things: strategic clarity, reporting on progress, a lot of which is non-financial, by the way, actually explaining how you're delivering on that strategy, because fundamentally the numbers will come later, and it's explaining your winning formula. And it's interesting how few companies actually do that last bit. They kind of assume everyone knows what their competitive strengths are, and very few actually talk about the opportunities for growth, which are primarily based on the tailwinds of the sector in which they operate. And we've looked at the leading companies within the Swiss market and analyzed how many of them are providing strategic clarity. Spoiler alert, it's just over 50%. So that means 40% of the largest companies on the SIX are not explaining their strategy on their website, which, when you think about it, seems a bit of a fundamental miss. Because if we think of the kind of the digital ecosystem from which investors get information about your company owns the bit in green. So you own your press releases, you own your results presentations, you own your annual reporting. And much of the outer part of the ecosystem, the third parties, the research reports, the market data platforms, a lot of what they say are actually just repurposing what you own, what you published in the first place. And actually, you have the opportunity to publish that, to add color to that on your IR or corporate website. And why that is fundamentally so important is if you think around the journey a potential new investor goes on when they think of investing in a business. Now, the fund manager or their assistant, imagine putting yourself in their kind of footsteps. I can do that quite easily because I used to be married to one. I'm still married to them, they just got a different job. But if you think around the process that they go through when they're looking at taking a position in a business they haven't invested in before, you can kind of put that into 4 fundamental buckets. They uncover a potential investment idea. They do an initial analysis, an initial review. Once that's passed, they do kind of the deep dive due diligence, and then obviously post-investment, they continue to monitor and decide to take a larger or a smaller position. And if you look along the bottom, we've kind of outlined how they're interacting with the company at each stage. So when they uncover that initial investment idea, they may never have spoken to that business or seen anyone that worked there. They may have seen them at a conference, an investor conference, and kind of seen them at a distance and waved and maybe said hello afterwards. But they haven't had much of an exchange at that point. They haven't managed to build any form of relationship. When they then move into the initial analyst review, what's really interesting is where those analysts are researching information about that company. The primary source is the company website, the company's press releases, and yes, third-party research as well. But the company website is what they're making their initial judgment on that business on the basis of. It is genuinely your shop window to the investment community. And at that point, they may well have not spoken to anyone on the IR team, despite that big flashing button that says, contact us. They probably ignored that. And that's why we believe it's very important that you meet the needs and expectations of your corporate audiences, of investors, by providing a joined-up digital experience, your corporate website, your IR website. And you probably have one of these, and it probably looks very much like this. You have an About Us section, a section where you talk about your business, a section where you talk about sustainability news, and obviously the investor section. And I can almost guarantee each section of that website is owned by a different department. A different department that don't talk to each other. I'm actually starting engagement with a major European international business tomorrow to discuss their corporate website. I have got to interview 27 teams of people for one corporate website. It's a very big company. But just think of the madness of 27 groups of individuals that are literally not talking to each other, and I've been told some of them cannot be in the same room at the same time as each other, are trying to tell a joined-up story about that business. And some of you may well say, actually, we do describe our investment case. We have a page in the IR section. In the Swiss market, you'll be one of a very few companies that actually has a dedicated investment page. But you probably have that same narrative in a deck or in your annual report or some other place. And the interesting thing is that although each of these sections is owned by a different department, your audiences do not respect those departmental boundaries. They're moving across the entire website. So when in the investment case, it says we have a strategy of X, efficiency joined up. But then they go to the About Us section and find your strategy is about saving whales. And believe me, this does happen. They're not going to believe you have a credible plan because you've undermined your own narrative. So please, when you're thinking around your investment narrative, don't just think around the investor section or that investment case page. Think of it as the whole site needing to tell that same joined-up story. Remember, the most important aspect is do they have a credible plan and the capability to deliver it. I mentioned that this presentation is based on science. So it's about time we did the science bit. I think the key thing is we actively track the needs and wants of the buy side and sell side, either by speaking to them or observing their behavior when they're using digital channels. One of the things we do is we have a whole team that just look at corporate websites. It's all they do every day. They look at about 1,000 a year, and we assess the effectiveness of those websites around 350 criteria, which cover the kind of the needs and expectations of most key corporate audiences. And we give them a score out of 100%. We even give them a scorecard. ABB happens to be the top scoring company within the SMI Expanded Index. This is their scorecard. You can see they score 67%, not bad. And we look at different elements of what makes a good website. We look at the overall narrative. How well are you telling the story? And then we look at that story across the different key parts of the website. And I've just highlighted investors there. So this is the data from all 50-odd companies in the SMI Expanded Index. What's most important is not the height of the peaks, but the difference between the tops and the bottoms. So you can see the ABBs of this world, they've got an average score up there of somewhere near 70% for how well they're communicating around sustainability, but others are scoring very poorly. And in reality, it doesn't make that much difference, the size of the company, the sector of the company. How well a company communicates online is more about a mindset. It's more about an ambition to want to communicate well and to meet the needs and expectations of audiences. And if you're looking for inspiration as who the best communicators are in your index, they're on here, and you can obviously download a copy of the presentation afterwards if you're interested. And if you want to know how well you compare to other international markets, you see you're a little bit behind, particularly when we look at things like sustainability. When we look at kind of reputational drivers, you can see that the Stock 50 and FTSE 100 British companies are performing a little bit better. But again, the key thing to take away is not the height of the peaks, but the extent of the height of those bars. The difference between those that do a really good job at communicating and those that fundamentally don't bother. So as well as looking at what's on those websites, the other thing that we do is we actively track people from Goldman Sachs, from Bloomberg, from the Financial Times, from thousands of fund management businesses. We actively track them using literally the thousands of websites that we manage. Okay? And for this research, we looked at over 7,000 of those companies, buy-side, sell-side, and the media. And we looked at 120,000 of their interactions with the corporate and IR website. I think this is what you could call a statistically robust data set that we looked at. We didn't just ask 5 people. We observed the behavior of thousands of people. And what did we think? Fine. Well, the first one is the investment community do take a broad view. That thing about siloing, they spend as much time in your IR section as outside of it. They spend as much time looking at your investment case page, your results, your annual report within your investor section, as they do looking at your strategy, reading about your business, wanting to understand what you're doing from an ESG perspective. So if you're not talking to the owners of those other parts of the website, you've got a problem. It's as simple as that. If we look at what they're looking at, if you look at what they're looking at within your investor section, results announcements, obviously the number one thing. Financial reports, investor events, I think you've been talking about capital market days earlier today. The investment case. Investor events is a great one, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. If you think around your investor day, you probably broadcast all 3 hours of it as one intolerably long video. Doesn't work particularly well, doesn't get viewed much after the fact, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail. But the key thing is, if you have a capital markets day, investors will return to view that content for 1 or 2 years afterwards, because quite frankly, the content that's published on that day at a good capital markets day is probably much better and more insightful than what they'll ever read in your annual report document in terms of understanding the fundamentals of your business. And if you want to know what they're looking outside of the investor section, yes, they're looking at information about the company and sustainability, they're reading about the news, but critically, they want to understand the business fundamentals. They want to understand what brands you own and their market position. They want to understand what business units you have. They want to understand your business strategy, how you innovate and what your products and services are. They want to know about the nuts and bolts. So if you have one of those corporate websites which just talks about purpose, because we were all told that purpose was going to save the world 3 or 4 years ago, you are missing what these people are looking for. Yes, it's nice to have a good purpose. It makes a good story. But fundamentally, investors want to understand the nuts and bolts of what makes your business effective, those competitive strengths. And people do ask me, I'm just going to cut and paste the content from my annual report into my corporate website, job done. Walls and walls of text. Our data shows if you put a little bit of time and energy into the way that you present your content, these really dry investors, do remember that, like waiters, they are getting younger. At least they look younger to me every year. You know, they have grown up in a world of multimedia. They have grown up in a world where they literally cannot read blocks of text. I have two, he laughed, I have two mid-20-year-olds, and they cannot read long blocks of text, even though both of them have very high-powered jobs in government. They find it impossible. They need everything put into little bite-sized chunks for them. And that's how we need to serve content up to our investor audience online. We have this paw print, very odd animal, but we have this paw print which shows the key drivers of investor sentiment, everything from quality of leadership, clarity of strategy, how you allocate your capital, how well you can deal with economic cycles, all of that kind of stuff. And if you look at a good corporate website, you will find across it that there is content being published about all of those elements. Not just hidden in annual reports, not just hidden in investor decks, but actually published on their websites where people can find it, digest it, make it easy to understand. So we measure that. And if we look at the SMI Expanded Index, well, I can tell you the first thing is only around a quarter have an equity story page, an investment case story page on their website, which basically means 3/4 are expecting investors to, well, basically decide for themselves what the investment narrative of that business is. Doesn't cost a lot to put an investment case page on your website. You've probably got somewhere in the IR manager's drawer a deck, probably 50 or 60 slides that he gives to every new investor that his manager sees at a conference. Turn it into a web page, but turn it into a web page that is engaging, that people want to interact with. And again, if you're interested in some of the numbers, one of my favorites, it's really funny. I gave this presentation at NERI in San Francisco a little while ago. The Americans, by the way, they don't tell their strategy to anyone. Less than 20% of US companies tell their strategy on their website, but get this, 80% of them have a history page. You may laugh, you're not that much better. 60% of companies here do explain their strategy, 80% have a history page. We are obsessed with telling people about the past, but not explaining to them where we're going in the future. I find it very odd. I think it's because it's easier to talk about things that have happened. So how can you walk the walk? How can you be the best in class when it comes to your own corporate and IR communications? And the next part of my presentation, this is lots of pictures basically, no more numbers, and we're looking at how you make a good first impression, how you make the best of those defining moments, whether it's a capital markets day or whether it's your results, what you can do in terms of reputational foundations like your strategy, innovation, and what you can do for a sustainability perspective just for investors. And I'll start with first impressions. I'm going to have a little glass of water, excuse me. Hopefully I won't get the microphone wet, we'll see. The thing is, first impressions really count. I gave you a couple of seconds to look at this image. Some of you probably feel a little bit nervous about what it might be. Looks a little bit grubby. That first impression is like, oh, I'm not quite sure about this. I can assure you it is 4 helium balloons that spell the word love, which have been artfully arranged so that you can't quite tell that. You may imagine it's all sorts of other different things. But that impression, those 5 seconds when I had a glass of water, do really make a difference. They do set your expectation as to what's coming next. So if you think around your IR landing page, that first page you come to in your IR section, or indeed the landing page of your whole corporate website, the key thing is most of your existing investors never see it. So if you gear up that landing page by providing links to all the latest documents and all the latest calendar events, you're missing a huge opportunity. Because your investors know those. They actually go directly to your results because they've signed up for your results alerts, right, on email. They get those, or you probably even send them to them. The people that are using this page the most are actually the people that don't know you. So when you're thinking around your IR landing page, that key page in the section, don't think about just providing a wall of links to content that the people are going to find anyway. Think about introducing your company. Think about it as being your shop window to the investor community, a bit like some of our clients shown here. I mentioned a good investment case. Who's telling your story? Well, as I mentioned, less than a quarter of companies in this market actually have an equity page. But the thing is, when you're thinking about that and you're wondering, should I bother? On average, if you have one of these pages and you've created it well and it tells a good story, the buy side and the sell side are spending 4-5 minutes reading it. And that sounds ridiculous. You think no one spends that much time reading a page on a website. But we have clients' websites where we can see Goldman Sachs literally spending 3, 4, 5 minutes on that page, reading that content, getting to the bottom of a very long page, and getting that story. It's a genuine thing that we observe. So, if you believe in that, join the likes of ABB and Silk Group and invest in an investment case page for yourselves. And if you want some inspiration around how one of those can look, how you can tell that complete story, look no further than Philips. This is their investment case page, which actually tells a very compelling and detailed narrative that kind of leads you through every element of their market, their strengths, and how that leads to financial performance. I mentioned those defining moments, those key things that you can do. You probably provide a list of links to PDFs and decks on your site. You can do more. You can take inspiration from Swisscom, Vodafone, Shell, GSK, who all try for each of their results announcements to provide a little bit of colour and narrative on their corporate website, to introduce the world to those results, to highlight the key elements of them. Or if you're like Diageo, one of our clients, yes, they do provide the nice little simple list over on the side, but when you click on one of those little black buttons, it actually opens up to give you a summary of their latest results. And I kid you not, we launched their website this summer. And we had the CEO of Goldman Sachs UK ring up the IR team to congratulate them on how much easier it was to understand their results following the redesign and rebuild of their site. It genuinely does work. Obviously, we all love a good PDF. We were brought up with PDFs. We love them dearly. And most of us do rely on them as the only way of explaining our annual results, our annual report. But some companies, and some of the examples here, like Roche and SGS Group, actually have a simple online summary, again, on their website. We think of them as being primarily aimed at retail investors, and yes, retail investors do appreciate them, they like them, they use that content, but actually, again, if you look at the time spent, fund managers, particularly, do read this content if it is presented in a good and meaningful manner. They use it as a digest for understanding the annual report, because quite frankly, very few of them actually read the full content of annual reports any longer. Yes, they may look up information in them, but they don't really consume them in that way. If you are having a capital markets day, as I said, please, 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 please don't just put that 3-hour video, that webcast that you made very proud of. It's got all the management team. Don't just stick it on a page and assume you're done. Follow the likes of Kimberly and Vodafone, for example, who chunk that up into lots of individual videos with some contextual content around the outside of them to make it more digestible. We actually, hysterically, we had a FTSE 10 client who had a capital markets day. It was a great day, really good. And they had a web page where they live streamed it, and they cut up the presentations into individual videos. What I particularly liked was on this page it told you that breakfast was served between 8 and 9, and that they were having coffee at 11:30. So when an investor returns 3 months later, obviously that's key information. There was nothing about what anyone had said or what the key takeaways from the day were. It was literally, here's some videos, oh, and by the way, this is when we had coffee. And you do wonder just what goes through people's minds when they do that. They're not going to do it next time, I'm glad to say. And if you are wondering, what can you do on a capital markets day, because it is quite difficult and there's lots of things going on. Rolls-Royce Engines, one of our clients, for their capital markets day, we put live 5 pages simultaneously as they were broadcasting the event. One summary, one for each of the business divisions. So again, when you're thinking about your capital markets day, don't break down the structure of how you communicate based on the breakout sessions. Think around, why my audience coming? What is their mindset? What do they want to deep dive in? If they're coming back in 9 months' time, what are they going to want to research? They probably want to research around either a market or a business division's performance or a key theme. They're not going to be interested in how you just happened to break out the day and what you had is in the experiential lounge afterwards. Thinking about business reputation foundations, strategy and business model. It's an absolute fundamental of any discussion that you have with a potential investor. This is our strategy. This is our credible plan. This is how we will succeed in the future. As I mentioned, only 60% odd of companies in this market explain their strategy online. There are a few examples here. Silk Group and my eyesight's gone. Nestle amongst them. The key thing here, again, is to think around your audience perspective on your strategy. The one thing that fills me with dread is when you go to a company strategy page and there's 2 paragraphs. We will create lasting stakeholder value, paragraph 1. Paragraph 2, we will look after the planet. Thank you. That's really insightful. I now understand how you're going to generate value for all. You really made that point clear. Other people say to me, how do I manage to keep that strategy page alive, up to date? It's really difficult to kind of keep that momentum going. I think Siemens have actually done quite a good job. Their strategy is very forward-looking. It's all about the future of mobility and how we'll all move around the planet in the next 5 years and how they're aligned to delivering against that. And the way that they then keep that alive is at the top. For those incredibly good eyesight, you may see some little tags. Each of those tags is aligned to one of the key elements of their strategy, whether that's autonomous cars or electric cars or whatever those may be. When you click on that tag, it then gives you a synopsis of all the latest stories, interviews, articles that they've published around that topic area. So they're trying to link the strategy to their ongoing reporting of progress. You can't get to anything financial from that strategy page. Everything is around reporting on the progress of the business against the strategy and how they are delivering against it, which I think is a really important takeaway. Yes, the majority of companies in this market do actually explain what they do. You'll be surprised, in some countries they don't, but in this market, most people do actually take the time to explain what they do. When you do so, though, from what perspective are you doing it? Are you just thinking about explaining, we make X, we make Y, or are you explaining, we're making more of Z because that's what the world's asking for? Or we're innovating in this space because actually that's where the market's heading. And very often, when companies talk about what they do, they divorce it from the reality of why people are buying from them. And that's a really important thing to bring together. And there are some examples here. Scotch Whisky, Diageo, one of our customers, for example, do a great job of explaining how they're continuing to make people in new markets buy their product through different ways of innovating, and how they're gaining market share in low and no alcohol, for example. And if you're ever interested in having a low alcohol beer or no alcohol beer, I can genuinely say no zero alcohol Guinness is very good. Just make sure it's very, very cold when you drink it. So, talking about innovation. One of the other things about innovation is probably most of your executive team will say that innovation is the primary growth driver of our business. Probably. It's probably up there, right? Innovation, primary growth driver for our business. But only a third of companies will actually explain what their innovation strategy is, what they're focused on, why they're innovating and spending money on what they're spending it on, and how that's going to deliver greater returns in the future. There are some notable examples, often in pharma, actually, because pharma's all about the pipeline of the future. But just think around, you may be publishing innovation-related stories in your newsroom, but if I'm an investor and I'm coming to your site, am I really going to trawl through 20 or 30 press releases to work out what your innovation strategy is, or I just want you to tell me? Just tell me what it is, and then give me the stories to show you delivering against it. But, use this idea of providing hubs of content that join all those little bits together. In this year, I couldn't possibly have a presentation without mentioning AI. I was trying to find some statistics about the Swiss market in AI, and it's actually quite hard. I know, for example, that in the UK, 56% of UK businesses cite AI as a major risk. It's 57% in the US. In this market, I couldn't find how risky you thought about it, but I did find from Deloitte some research that showed that 40% of execs in this market think that their business or their sector is going to be fundamentally transformed by Gen AI in the next year. So I guess that probably makes it a major risk. So AI is a really important thing companies need to talk about, but most companies don't know how to talk about it. They're very shy. Less than 1% of large businesses actually have any content on their website where they talk about AI and how AI may be impacting their business or how they're leveraging AI for themselves. And when I say AI will mean many things, from our perspective, one of the things it means is there's going to be a lot less searching. All right? There's going to be a lot less searching, a lot less Googling, because actually we're just going to be using answer engines. Who's asked ChatGPT what to buy a relative for Christmas? No one. I asked this in the UK, everyone put their hand up. I don't know whether that means you all love your relatives and know them much better than we do, or whether we're just lazier than you are. I don't know. But fundamentally, we are increasingly not searching for content in Google. We are looking to answer engines for this content. This year alone, there will be 25% less traditional search queries. By 2026, there will be a quarter less. Think how long it's taken Google to build up the volume of searches they have at the moment. It's taken like 20 years. Imagine it's taken you 20 years to build up this amount of consumer behavior, a quarter of less will then disappear in 1 year's time. When you talk about a major threat to your business, it doesn't get much bigger than that. And to put that into reality, that means 1 billion less Google, Bing, and DuckDuckGo's, for those people that use DuckDuckGo like me, searches every day. 1 billion less searches every day. Now, are you ready for that kind of transformation? By the way, they're predicting now that ChatGPT answering, will have overtaken Google in 4 years' time. So if at the moment you're spending money, big question, you're spending money on search engine optimization or on search campaigns to raise the profile of your company, you need to change. You need to think about large model optimization. So optimizing for answers, not searching. And what that means is you actually have to think around, what questions are people going to ask? And can I create my content in a way that kind of answers them? Because if you do, when ChatGPT or one of these other engines like Claude creates that summary, they'll have created the summary from what you've said, not from what someone else has said. And it's actually a little fun thing to do when you go home, if you're like me. Go and ask ChatGPT the strategy of your company and just see what sources it uses as a reference. Because if you're not the first one, you've got a problem. And you can solve it. You can solve it by providing answers. You can solve it by pre-chunking your content. So chunking up your content is actually better for humans. It's better for machines. Double down on your technical SEO, very boring stuff, but it allows these machines to read your content more easily. And use this thing called public schemas. I know I'm talking technical jargon at this moment, gobbledygook, but think of it this way. When ChatGPT goes, or you research and says, who's our CFO? ChatGPT will go and read the page about your CFO, and it will probably get the name right. Hopefully it will get the job role and company right. But the rest of the stuff it might be a bit woolly on. But if you use some hidden tags on your CFO's page, well, you have a tag that says previous experience, a tag that says speeches made, a tag that says age. Everyone's obsessed by age. You have these hidden tags, and then when ChatGPT goes to make that summary, it will read those things. So it will actually know where they worked previously, what skills they've got, what educational qualifications they've got, and it will present them very nicely and neatly for you. It will cost you basically nothing, but you can significantly improve the experience. And when we think about LMOs and you're thinking around, yeah, but are investors, fund managers really going to be using these tools? I was in San Francisco at NERI earlier this year, where we had the head of research at BlackRock explaining to an audience, they're all just like, bit scared, how they were not just using things like Copilot any longer, because that's old school. They weren't using kind of off-the-shelf large language models. What they were doing, they were creating what they called agents, literally virtual AI researchers that weren't just going and creating, tell me the EBITDA for this company and its competitors over the last 5 years, put that into a chart, thank you very much. No. You ask the agent, create me a research report on this sector, and it will go on. It will analyze each of the companies, their strategy, their business model, their financials, and it will put them into a nice report. That's what BlackRock, you look scared. I'm scared. You should have seen the guy on the panel from Jefferies. He was like holding that, oh my God. He was very clear. They are not going to be using any of this nonsense quite yet, but it's coming. And so just thinking about this large language optimization thing is really important. The last thing, very briefly, just on sustainability. I'm going to finish on time. I've never done this before. This is unheard of. I must have missed some slides somewhere. They've taken some out. They've hidden some. The last thing I just want to talk about is investors and how they consume ESG content. We used to spend a lot of time optimizing data for investors around ESG performance. I hate to break it to everyone, but most fund managers, unless they're from a very, very small fund, they're not going to corporate websites to find data. They're buying it. They're buying it from rating agencies, basically. That's how rating agencies make most of their money these days. It's selling data. Because actually, the way you all present data on your individual websites and individual reports actually doesn't marry up very well. So they just pay someone else to make it all nice and easy to consume. What they're actually really interested in is the narrative. They want to understand your strategy. They want to understand your materiality. Materiality is very important, particularly post-CRSD. They do actually have models where they'll look at, okay, this company, this sector, here's what I expect to be material to them and them talking about, but this is actually what they're talking about. They seem to have missed this thing. Why have they missed this thing? best I go and have a look and research that, because it seems a little bit odd that this company, for example, that makes alcoholic beverages. I'm obsessed with beer. It's not Diageo, it's another one, a major brewer actually. One of the key things is they don't talk about the impact of climate change. And if any, I don't know if we've got any beer drinkers. Anyone a beer drinker? Not going to admit it in public forum. Ah, there we go. Excellent. If you're a beer drinker, I have very bad news for you. Because of climate change, the price of your beer is likely to go up by 25% in the next 5 years. Because hops are incredibly drought intolerant. And actually, if anyone is here and looked at the future, I don't know why I look at this stuff, looked at the future pricing of barley coming from Eastern Europe, where most of our barley comes from, you'll find that it's just going up and up and up because they've had some terrible harvests because of increased temperature. And actually, one of the other brewers that we work for, slightly incestuous relationship, but you work for most of the companies in the same place, they have some dedicated content explaining what they're doing to mitigate the impact of climate change on their hop and barley crop with the farmers that they work with. Which one are you going to invest in? The one that doesn't mention this major risk to their business and how they're going to cope with it, or the one that is proactively explaining, yes, we are at risk from climate change, yes, this is what's going to happen, but this is what we're doing to mitigate against that risk. And one of the fascinating things when you think around most investor websites, one of the major things that's probably in your annual report, one of the major things that your investors are thinking about is not just your future prospects, but also those major risks to your business. But I'm almost guaranteed virtually every one of your corporate websites will not mention major risk once. Because somehow we think if we don't talk about it, people won't think about it. So the key thing just to think about is do point your investors towards that important ESG information from within their own section, just in case they're feeling a little bit lazy and they can't go and find it for themselves. So, what have we hopefully learned from this presentation? The first and most obvious thing, investment sentiment drives investor decisions. You all absolutely knew that before you came into the room. But critically, the thing hopefully now you're thinking about is maybe our IR or corporate website can do a better role in driving sentiment, not just providing information. Your digital communications do genuinely play a pivotal role in onboarding new investors. They also are incredibly, I couldn't quite believe this. We looked at 15 of the UK's largest companies, and we have data for. We looked at their list of sell-side analysts, and we looked at the most active users of their website. It was the same group of people. And I said this to one client, they're like, don't be silly. We send all of our results presentations to our sell-side coverage. I'm sure you do, but they're coming back to your website to read what you're saying in your strategy section. Believe it or not, we literally done the correlation. If we look at the investment community, which, by the way, are the largest corporate audience of our corporate website, we've done the figures of that. Students are the next one. But the biggest single identifiable corporate audience are actually members of the investment community looking at corporate websites. Within that group, the sell side are the ones that are coming most frequently and reading for the longest. So again, just think about that. Have a chat with your own sell-side analyst coverage and ask them, what do you think of my website? Is it great? Is it telling you what you need? Or is it a frustrating online experience? Because as we all know, particularly on Black Friday, a frustrating online experience is a failed one. It's one that we give up, we go somewhere else. We ask ChatGPT because we just can't be bothered finding stuff for ourselves. We've shown in those graphs that there's a huge difference between the best online communicators and those that don't. And if any of you want to score for your own company, just come and see Leon and I, and we're happy to score your own company for you, or we've probably already scored them because we've done all the biggest. And I think the key thing that I'd like you to take away really is that to bridge the gap between being a good communicator and a not communicator is less about resources and technology and more actually about ambition. It's about a mindset and that collaboration between the different departments in the business. Because without that collaboration within the business, that kind of disjointed reflection of how you don't like to talk to each other is then projected onto your audiences and what they think of you. That's it. Thanks for listening. Coffee's coming up. Do come and grab me earlier on if you have any questions, and thank you.